Buenas tardes. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elvia Ramirez, and I'm an associate professor of ethnic studies here at Sac State. I would like to welcome you all to the second annual Immigration Forum sponsored by the Task Force for the Center on Race, Immigration, and Social Justice, or CRISJ for short. Task Force members in the audience, can you stand up, please, so that we can acknowledge you, please? And for all the amazing work you've done in putting this event together. Oh, thank you. All right, so the theme of this year's forum is From Dreams to Social Justice, Comprehensive Immigration Reform Now. We'd like to thank our many sponsors for supporting this event. This event was supported by the College of Social Sciences and Interdisciplinary Studies, by Professor Ayala Casas from the Department of Sociology here at Sac State, the Sac State Center for Teaching and Learning Visiting Scholars Program, Sac State's Sociology Department and Graduate Program, the Multicultural Center, CRISJ, the California Faculty Association, and the One World Initiative. So today I'm very honored to present our keynote speaker, Dr. Alvaro Huerta. Dr. Alvaro Huerta holds a joint faculty appointment in urban and regional planning and ethnic and women's studies at California State Polytechnic University in Pomona. As an interdisciplinary scholar, Dr. Huerta teaches and conducts research on the intersecting domains of community and economic development, Chicano and Latino studies, immigration and the Mexican diaspora, social movements, social networks, and the informal economy. Among his many scholarly publications, he's the author of the book, Reframing the Latino Immigration Debate Towards a Humanistic Paradigm. While born in the US, he was raised in a Mexican slum, Colonia Libertad, in Tijuana, Baja California, and a violent US barrio, Ramona Gardens Housing Project, or Big Hazards Project in Boyle Heights, East LA. He holds a PhD in city and regional planning from UC Berkeley, one of the first Chicanos to do so. He also holds a master's in urban planning and a bachelor's degree in history, both from UCLA. So please help me welcome Dr. Alvaro Huerta.
Muchas gracias. Thank you for all the organizers for putting this event together. Everyone said to me that the faculty that I know here, that the students here are very smart and a good-looking bunch, so I do agree with that. So the fact that you're here at this great university says something about you. I believe that the university is not just to teach you how to take tests and memorize and so on and so forth, but to become leaders, to become leaders of tomorrow. I personally am disappointed in my generation. I think my generation has failed this country and the one preceding me. But I think I have faith in your generation, the millennials. I think millennials are smarter. They're more open to diversity. They're more willing to accept other groups of people in regards to race, class, sexual orientation, religion, or lack thereof. So I think I have hope in the young people of today. Abby Hoffman, who was what they called a yippie in the early 1970s, says, don't listen to anybody over 30. Luckily, I'm 29, so please listen to me today. So I want to start with my presentation, and it's about immigration, it's about Trump, it's about creating a better society, and it's about looking forward to in terms of what to do. So this presentation, like everything I've been doing recently, has to do with, it's based on a recent book that I wrote. It's an immigration. There's a special today, is one for $15, two for $30. So take advantage. I'm just kidding. And recently, a former professor of mine at UCLA, probably the best, the most renowned Chicano historian of all time, Juan Gomez Quiñones, and pretty much in general, he's up there, I think, with Howard Zinn and others. He recently wrote an article and I help edit the article. That's what happens when the student, you have like the student-mentor relationship, and then it comes to a point where it switches, right? So all of a sudden now you become the editor. So it's a dialectics between students and teachers. So I helped edit an article about anti-Mexicanism. As we all know, today the issue is about, in the White House, with the orange man in the White House, it's about division, it's about attacking groups, it's about pitting groups against each other. And one of the groups, historically, that has been attacked in this country are African Americans. One of the groups that has been pretty much wiped out, with some exceptions in terms of their population, is Native Americans. And then a favorite target today, apart from Muslims, are Mexicans. So in general, Latino immigrants are under attack. We see how Puerto Ricans are being treated versus people in Houston and Florida, and they are American citizens. But the Mexicans in particular have been a favorite target of Trump and the administration. But this is not new. I urge people not to focus too much on what's happening today, because we have to look at history. And we see throughout history, since the United States first took over Texas in the early 1800s, and later half of the Southwest, of Mexico, what is now known as the Southwest, California, Texas, Arizona, Nevada, all these different states belonged to Mexico at one point. It wasn't a Mexican-American war. It was more a U.S. invasion against Mexico. Because it seems like when we have like this false equivalency, there was a war between countries. No, it was an imperialist war, one country overtaking the other. So since that time, Mexicans have been under attack from day one. And Mexicans, I don't see Mexicans as immigrants. I see them all like those hummingbirds, like those birds that are just like, you send them off and they come home. So when people come here, we're just coming home. We're just coming back to the motherland. So I don't really see immigration that way. I don't see immigration like Mexicans coming from the southern part, from Mexico to northern part of America. It's pretty much, we're just coming home. But as we're here, and as we've been here since day one, especially the indigenous people, we see that natives and indigenous people, brown people, black people, and others have been under constant attack. For example, in the early 1920s and 30s, during the Great Depression, the United States was going through the greatest economic depression they've ever experienced. It wasn't just in the United States, it was all over the world. With unemployment reaching like 50, 60, 70% of Americans unemployed, people losing their homes, businesses, banks closing. Everything was pretty much on the verge of collapse. And this is a time when the Socialist Party was on the uprise. They were taking advantage of an opportunity to show the inherent contradictions in capitalism. But what happens, even during that time, the Mexicans became a scapegoat. They said, Americans are unemployed because the Mexicans are taking your jobs, so let's deport them. So we see here in the early 20s, 30s, during the Great Depression, the Depression started in the late 20s and then into the 30s, over 2 million Mexicans were deported. And by Mexicans, I'm just saying Mexican immigrants, because at the time it wasn't really a big deal in terms of the border and immigration. You really didn't have the immigration like we have today. But we see Mexican Americans, people that were born here, after the Treaty of Guadalupe de Hidalgo in 1848, even they were deported as well. So there was in this case, there was no discrimination between people that migrated from Mexico at the time because of the Mexican Revolution, especially, and people that were here generations. They were deported as part of this idea that the Mexicans are taking our jobs. They're responsible for economic loss, so therefore to create more jobs for whites, we've got to ship out the Mexicans. And we see here also at a time when during World War II, there was a major need for agricultural labor. Now, why is that? Because all the white farmers were going to war. They were going to World War II. So you had a lot of white farmers enlisting, going to World War II, and then you also had a lot of white farmers in the early 1900s that were leaving that lifestyle, the rural agriculture work, and going to the cities. So you had a major gap in terms of agriculture labor that the Mexicans filled. And here we're talking about 1942 to 1964, we're talking about almost 5 million Mexicans came to the United States to fulfill those needs, to feed America and to feed our soldiers, like our astronauts, like Malcolm X said. And this is how they were treated. Instead of being treated like you're coming here to save the day, the first thing that they did during these, when they were processed in Mexico, they were sprayed with DDT. I mean, is this the way you treat like guest workers? It doesn't sound like a guest to me. And this is how they treated them. And my grandfather, my father, they were part of this. They experienced this humiliation. Because people from the countryside, and some of you might be your parents from the rancho, like my parents. You know, they're like, they don't even talk to you. They just tell you what to do. See, Papa, you know, like, Monday, you know. None of this dude, you have to call them instead, you know. They're like dictators, these people. Very conservative. I mean, Mexicans from the countryside are like perfect Republicans. They're against abortion, they're against gay, they're very conservative religiously. Right? They're against welfare. They're very, very conservative in their own ways. But because the Republicans treat them like a piñata, you know, they're not flocking to that party, right? And one thing that these people, now that I'm educated, these people, right? What white people have is that they're very, apart from in the conservative old ways, they're very, they're not open to certain things. Like they're not open, for example, to take off their clothes in front of others. Like a lot of American teens do, like when they have to go to junior high or high school. They don't do that. So for them to be exposed to this, being put in a room like this, everybody stripped naked, I mean, it's humiliating. And this is what they did. This is how they lived. There was an awesome, incredible photographer, for those of you that are into photography, Leonard Nato, awesome photographer. He took these pictures both in Mexico and in the United States. So these are the living conditions of the workers, of the braceros. Now, they call them braceros, and nobody questions this except for me, because I went to Berkeley, so I questioned it. They call them braceros because of their arms. All they wanted them was for their arms. Not for their brains, not for their dreams, not for their ability to be productive, but for their arms. The braceros. And when those braceros got injured or hurt or even died in the fields, then they were just sent back. They were like discarded like razor blades. But it wasn't just in the agriculture sector where Mexicans came over here to help the United States, and obviously they were able to send money home too, even though their savings were taken from them, from both corrupt governments, the United States and Mexico. They also worked in agriculture in the railroad tracks as well, like in Oregon and other places. But it wasn't just the agriculture where there was exploitation, it was also in the cities. In the cities here, we see in the 1940s, during the same period, Pachucos and Pachucas were harassed by the police, by white mobs, and by the Navy, by servicemen. Now, once again, there's this myth, the Zoot Suit riots. It seems like the Zoot Suiters were causing the riots, but it wasn't like that. it was more like a Rodney King thing. It was the cops beating up on the pachucos, which right now you would see like cholos or homeboys. You kind of see them that way. But they like to dress in this style of their coats and their pants and everything in a very fashionable way that Luis Valdez, wrote a play called, Zoot, where you see that there's harassment taking place, during this time period as well in the cities, and particularly focusing on the youth. But, Americans are good at one thing is that when they enact some type of action, they go back to it, right? Like part of learning history, I studied history at UCLA, is part of learning history is to not repeat it. But for Americans, or at least the government, they repeat it. So after World War II, the United States reached one of the best economic booms that have ever experienced because of the war economy. I mean, FDR, this guy he brought the United States, back on its feet and even stronger because of the war and the production that was going on and so on and so forth. But even without that success, the United States the government still needed a scapegoat, and once again, they referred to the Mexicans. Not to say that there weren't other scapegoats, like African Americans being beat up in cities and being lynched in the countryside, but Mexicans in this case, one of my topics for research are a group that historically have been targeted. In this case, over 1 million Mexicans were deported under what's called Operation Wetback. And the Orange Man in the White House even referred to this program conducted by Eisenhower, a former general, and praised it as something that it was possible. Like, let's go back to Operation Wetback in regards to undocumented immigrants today. So this is once again another example of this. But the terror continues. It's not like history 50 years ago, 75 years ago, 100 years ago, where maybe your grandparents or great-grandparents lived at the time. No, this is today. Today, whether you're Mexican or Salvadorian or Filipino or two Canadians out there, you're under assault. And immigrants, undocumented immigrants, are not marginal actors. Because people think like the narrative is, we're just getting the bad hombres or the criminals. That's not the case. Immigrants are not immigrants in that they act by themselves. They're human beings, and they're embedded in families. They're embedded in communities. I might say something right now that's probably gonna why did we invite this guy? The most radical thing that I have to say in the history of mankind that has ever been said is that I don't even think we should call immigrants immigrants. We should just refer to them as human beings. Because we all come from somewhere. I don't think any of you were born on this campus. Everybody migrated to come to this campus, right? If you were born somewhere and you migrated to Sacramento for education, maybe your parents came to California because of economic opportunities. So we've all migrated. Everybody has migrated. Everybody. Everybody from day one, because of drought, because of war, because of famine, because of war. There's so many reasons why people migrated. So when we're looking at immigrants right now, or undocumented immigrants, I don't even want to call them that because they're just human beings. But they're not going back to my point, they're not marginal actors. You have millions of immigrants, of people that are undocumented, and they live in a household where, let's say, one brother is undocumented, but the other one is a U.S. citizen. That's like mixed families. So when you deport that one, then you're breaking up the family. So it's not just causing terror towards that individual, but the whole family. And especially when you're dealing with Mexicans, when it comes to the family, if family was a category in the Olympics, we'd be winning like gold medals, We don't mess around when it comes to family.
It's not just mom, dad, 2.5 kids and the dog. It's abuela y abuelo. We even create things like padrino, madrina, Sancho, Sancho nunca duerme. And all the primos, hermanos, Our cousins sometimes are like our brothers. Sometimes you're asleep and you're at your house and all of a sudden it's like, levántate, tu tío va a venir, they kick you out and there's your uncle taking your bed. Or you wake up, who are these people? Your abuelita's making tortillas de harina. Then you send them back because they're cold. Abuelita, come on, you're losing it. So when you're attacking an immigrant, and most of them that are being deported are non-violent offenders, and even if they have a criminal record, I don't even buy that. Because a lot of times what's considered a crime is coming to this country. So you have to be careful, you have to be critical. Just because the government says that person has a record doesn't mean, what are you talking about? Right. What are you talking about? Are you talking about like meeting with the Russians, or are you talking about, you have a record because you crossed and you were busted and then you came back? You see? Or did you have a lawyer to defend yourself? So it gets a little tricky. Our file got pardoned. I don't see any of the immigrants getting pardoned. But this is happening today. All of you know this history or what's happening. And for me, when I started, when I started doing research on immigrants, I was doing my research, and once Trump came down the elevator with his immigrant wife, coming down, and the first thing he says was, Mexicans are rapists, criminals, and drug dealers. He pretty much said it, not because he believes it. I don't think he believes anything. He said it because that was one way of getting attention. And there was another way of the white racists coming out of the woods. Finally we have the white savior. So it was a way of creating hysteria, controversy, but at the same time bringing all this attention to him. And me, being who I am, I said to myself, where are our Latino elected officials speaking out? I didn't hear any of them speak out. In Congress, for example. Now they're speaking out a little bit, but it's like, where are they at? So it's like, I feel like I had to begin to attack the racism coming from the highest level of leadership in the Republican Party at the time, which was Trump being the candidate or being one of the candidates, is to attack this narrative that a lot of people accepted because they wanted to believe it. Trump didn't make people believe this. He just reaffirmed what you already believed. You just didn't want to say it in public, right? You just didn't want to say it. So a lot of times it's like, no, he's not convincing anybody. If you're racist, you're racist. And if somebody's saying that, it's just reinforcing what you believe. Now you can say it out in the open. Right? It's like they're coming out of the closet. It's like, finally they can go and march and do their racist things. So for me, going back to this idea that we should not see immigrants as immigrants, we should see them as human beings. We have to reframe the argument. What we're looking at here is families, hardworking people, honest people, and not to get into this, oh no, they're not drug dealers, oh yes, they are drug dealers. Not to get into their argument, but to get into this idea that what you're saying is foolish, is ignorant, is racist, and at the end of the day, people come here because they want a better life for themselves, and they want a better life for their children. And a lot of times they don't even come here out of choice. They're here because of NAFTA, this free trade agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico that pretty much demolished the agricultural base in Mexico, where these small farmers, like my parents, they're not alive anymore, but those type of, what Marx refers to as the peasant class, they have to flee to the United States because their economic base has been undermined because they can't compete against the U.S. companies, right, that flood the market with corn, for example. Or you have Vietnamese here for the first time in the 1970s they're not here, they didn't come here just for no reason, they came here because the United States invaded Vietnam, and that caused migration. See, so we have to be careful of why people come, and it's not a simple one answer question or it's a question of, it's very complex, and the United States has a lot to do with migration to begin with, and benefits from it. And a lot of these individuals, they pretty much put into the system more than what they get out. Now, all they are is convenient scapegoats, but at the end of the day, even if you look at conservatives, like in the Wall Street Journal, and then some of these other conservative groups, they'll tell you that for them, they want open borders because they want competition. And the immigrants that come in today are younger, they have, they're risk takers. Yeah, I grew up in this country and I was like the laziest American kid in the history of mankind. You know? Like I had the TV schedule memorized, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But immigrants, they're like 12, they're like already on, smoking cigars and like waiting for Social Security because they've been working since they were 2, These people don't mess around, So they have that work ethic that we need in this country. So this idea that the criminals, we're looking at Los Angeles, where I was raised and where I reside, where the Dodgers got their butts kicked recently, because se les quita for kicking the Mexicans out of Chavez Ravine. Street vending is illegal. And they're treated like if they're like selling crack or something. The cops come in, they arrest them, they take their goods. A lot of times, this might not seem like a lot, but it probably costs like $500, $1,000 to get everything and everything together. They take everything from them, and they sign them, and then they have a misdemeanor charge. Is this what you want the cops to do? Apart from killing black people, is this what you want them to do? And now they're trying to say, okay, we're not going to do misdemeanor charge, but you're still fining them. So if they don't pay that, let's say the ticket's $100, if they don't pay that, then there's criminal charges. Right? So, poor people have been criminalized. It's a crime to be poor in this country. Because this is what we want. We want people that are entrepreneurs. We want people to hustle. The Mexicans don't mess around. They get up at 5 in the morning like nothing. You wake me up at 5 in the morning, it's like the world's gonna end. They're good at waiting in line, so they're waiting in line for like 10 hours. I'm talking about and then like a young person like yourself, like the cell phone dies and then you want it and you go crazy. It's like, what's happening? Where's it out there? But we have to be careful not to buy the narrative. Not to buy the narrative. What's being told to you is a lie. It's not true. You talk to any Muslim, you talk to any immigrant, you talk to any black person in the barrio, in the ghetto, they're just like everybody else. They might not have it as easy as somebody that grew up rich or in the suburbs, middle class, but they're just like anybody else. They just want what everybody else wants. So for me, these things are important. These photographs are by Antonio Turo. He's a Mexican. He's actually also white. Just a funny story here because his parents were activists in the 1950s. They were Jewish, and because of McCarthy, they fled to Mexico. So went to Mexico City, and Antonio Turo, he's around 55, 60, around there. He was born in Mexico, but if you see him, he's blonde, blue-eyed, speaks perfect Spanish. All his life he spent in Mexico. He's a Mexican. And especially when he drinks, he's a real good Mexican. It's like a few shots of tequila, the Mexican comes out. Yo soy mexicano. He's like, all right. You have to tell me, brother, I believe you, But he did these beautiful photographs that I used for this book. And he was the first one to photograph the Zapatistas, Marcos, Subcomandante Marcos. Just look at him online. It's Antonio Turo. He's an amazing photographer. Worked in Chiapas, lived in Chiapas for a long time, and photograph the population. So these are photos that he took when he was in the United States on a fellowship at the University of Notre Dame. So for me, it's looking at them, looking at like I said, looking at these human beings as human beings, you know, not looking at them as criminals or anything, but just portraying them for what they are. And the Republicans, for the most part, they don't talk about this that often, but a couple of years ago, they talked a lot about family values. Like, family values was a big deal. But you see that in terms of family values, like the Mexicans and Chinese and Filipinos and other groups tend to have more bigger families than Americans, than white Americans. And if that's the case, if they are people that are into the family and want big families, why doesn't this family value apply to brown people? It seems like family values doesn't apply to brown people. It seems like they're not being embraced, for like practicing those values that they preach for so long. I mean, they haven't been doing it lately. They've been focusing on racism and tax for the rich. But this is something I think is important that we see. I was talking earlier, with the professor that my brother is a world famous artist, Huerta. Google him. This guy is amazing. He paints like Rembrandt and Velázquez. Studied at Art Center in Pasadena and UCLA. And he did this painting a while back when he was at Art Center in Pasadena as an illustrator with this dichotomy with indigenous, Mexicano, and obviously a Greek god. But for me, when I look at this, I see this idea that when we're thinking about racism in the United States, it's always like a black and white thing. But now it's becoming more like a brown and white. And this brown and white binary is a false one that we need to reject. So there's people out there, there's a lot of, there's been this movement in the late 1800s and early 1900s called eugenics, and it's a pseudoscience. It's not a real science, but there's one idiot, Sir Francis Galton. He discovered this, or coined this science, or pseudoscience. It's not a science, with this idea that trying to figure out that Anglo-Saxons were superior to other people. So they did these like IQ tests and other type of tests to make that determination. Right, to see like, oh, they're superior, and look, it's the brain, because of this, and this. And so this is a big movement. This is where the Nazis got it from. Like, Nazism is based on eugenics, and a lot of it was practiced in the United States. Part of the idea is breeding as well. It's like you're breeding, like the way they breed dogs and like having a certain type of breed. So it's like breeding the certain population to get the perfect Nazi, And you hear Trump talk about this, about the stock, like have good genes. So this idea of like breeding, like two Germans, put them together and they get a good Nazi. But in this case, we see this Sir Francis Galton that came up with the pseudoscience in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and others picked up on it. And you have individuals at this small school in the East Coast called Harvard, where those idiots gave George Bush an MBA. Jesus Christ, I thought it was a good school. What happened there, people? And this late professor, political science professor Samuel P. Huntington, he wrote an article called the Hispanic Challenge. I'm getting warmed up now, I should take off my jacket. The Hispanic Challenge. And this idiot argued in this Foreign Affairs article that Mexicans were inferior to whites. I mean, he pretty much said that. He argued, which is true, with this part I do agree that Anglo-Saxons founded the United States. I do agree with that. But his argument, this is how he put it. So Anglo-Saxons founded the United States, their progress. Mexicans, in this case, because of the indigenous blood, are primitive. Over here we have Christians. Over here we have Catholics. Right here we have English speaking. Over here we have bilingual Spanish speaking. So he made this false dichotomy and saying that the people over here were a threat to the United States because they were going to balkanize the United States. They were going to take back Islam and all. I can't even take back my credit. How am I gonna take back a slot, you know? Like, take it easy, dude. But he was arguing this. And in his paper, he made it very clear. He didn't mince any word. That indigenous people, Mexican people, were an inferior race. And we're talking about Harvard, the most influential university in the United States. And these ideas permeate through policymaking. So they might not say it in the same way he did. And he had that cover up, he's from Harvard, like a Harvard racist, you know, it's just kind of like, but they say it in other ways, in coded language, right? And this is what I'm talking about in terms of like the way that the narrative is, the false narrative. We have to reject this altogether. But for me, it's not, the academic work that I do, it's not, I mean, Cal Poly's lucky to have me there, so they better treat me nice, or else I'll quit. Just on my good looks, they should give me tenure, you know what I'm saying? I don't know what's wrong with these people, what are they waiting for? For me, it's not just about scholarship. It's not about that. Like UCLA, UC Berkeley, the best, pretty much the best professors in the world in terms of preparation, all that. But a lot of stuff they write, it doesn't trickle down to the people. You know, a lot of the researchers. A lot of it is up here, it's all theoretical. But for me, it's not just theoretical, it's practical. So the political is personal. You know. So it's like everybody, our stories doesn't start with us. It starts with our grandparents, it starts with our parents, right? So in this case, he's my grandfather, you know, he was a bracero, we're talking here in the 1950s, from the rancho, had 10 kids, 10 or 11 kids, I forgot already, right? My uncles, there are like 10 of us. Each of his kids had 10 children. And so I have 10 uncles and aunts and 100 first cousins. I have 7 siblings. So here's a picture of my grandfather, my grandmother, and I just recently my cousin Martin, he texted me, and he texted me a photograph of a card. My grandfather, I didn't even know this. He was part of the UFW. He was a member of the UFW with Cesar Chavez. Because he was part of the Bracero program, and when the Bracero program ended, a lot of them stayed here working an independent contract, and he was in the UFW. And I didn't know that. And this is part of history, because anybody can just lie, oh yeah, my grandparents. But this is history right here, it's evidence. And actually, I wrote an article when my father met Cesar Chavez. You look it up, you just Google it. And every time you Google something of mine, I get $1, so please do it. I mean, they should give me money. They give the Russian money, they should give me money too. So there's a picture of a good-looking couple here, my father and my mother. So they're both passed away now, but this is them. My father didn't mess around, like he was telling me. He always carried his gun right here. And even when he was in East LA in the projects, he had his gun. And that's why I never disobeyed him. And he was like, go take out the trash. I don't want to take out the trash. What? See, Papa. Anything else, sir? And there's a picture of my brother, older brother, Salomon. And I'm the good-looking one on the right. So that's, actually I was born here. My mother used to clean houses in Tijuana. They moved from Michoacán, the Rancho, Michoacán, Saco Grande, to Tijuana in the 1960s. And she used to cross over to clean houses. And, you know, like I was saying about the Mexican, the way we are connected, big families. She had a comadre, when my mom was pregnant with me, she had a permit, she had a work permit, and it didn't say in the back, like, you couldn't have kids in the United States, you know. So she was smart, she goes, when I'm gonna get ready to deliver Alvaro, that's me, I'm gonna deliver him here in the United States. So one of her comadres, like, drove her to Sacramento, and it's like 8 hours, and I was born over there. But and then 40 days later, I came back, and I spent four years of my life in Tijuana. So then after Tijuana, when I was, 4 years spending in Tijuana with my family, and eventually they fixed their papers, we came to Hollywood. We all lived in a big house, it was like 40 of us in the house. That was amazing. With all my cousins and everything, and then from there my mom said, I want to apply for a housing project, for public housing. She didn't know what projects were. She should have, because they're violent. And so she ended up applying. She got accepted to this project, and my brothers and I, my sisters, this is what we were raised. And this is how we were welcomed. So that the idea of coming to the United States was not a happy one for us, because the first thing the kids wanted to do was to beat us up so we can join the local gang. For me, I didn't really join the gang because I've always been skinny all my life. My gang application was rejected. You can't defend the barrio, rejection. Okay, move on to something else. So my mother was a visionary, so she told my dad, okay, I want you to, one day, she's like I guess I was a lazy American kid. She told my dad, okay, I want you to take Alvaro and Salomon, I was 13, he was 15, to go work in Malibu as day laborers. So East LA is over here, West LA is over here, and it could be like two different worlds. Literally, it's like, you know, you're talking super poor, super rich. And so my dad took us one day, woke us up at 5 in the morning, I still hate him for that. And we're there, we're doing this day labor work all day, and I was tired, I get just tired just like picking up a cup of coffee, but I was like already tired, pulling weeds all day. And then I was like crying right there, like after 8 hours of working, I was like cursing my mom, why did she force my dad to do this? And then once I was there, like crying and looking at the ocean, that's how the rich have like the ocean as their backyard, and mine were like railroad tracks and gang members. I was like crying right there, like pulling all these weeds and waiting for the day to be over. Like, like when you're doing something, you keep looking at the clock, Like when I was a Catholic, I used to look at the church, the clock, like, when's it gonna end? And then you time it, like when you start hugging, okay, we're halfway there, Passing out the money, okay, 3/4, yeah. Thank you, Lord. So then I was there, and then I had my first epiphany. I was like, I'm too lazy to work, I'm gonna go to college. So that's when I decided to go to the university. First I started at Upper Bound at Occidental College. It was a summer program. We lived at the dorms. They gave everything was provided for us. It's for a program for historically disadvantaged kids. They have some that use residential and non-residential. We were talking 10th, 11th grade, 6 weeks at Oxy. For the first time in my life, someone told me that I could go to college. I was gifted in math, so that helped me. But when it came to reading and writing, I wasn't up to par, so they really helped me with that. But because of Upper Bound, I was able to get into UCLA as a freshman. First I was a math major, then I became an activist, so I turned to history. And then later I went to receive my master's in urban planning at UCLA, and then a PhD at UC Berkeley. But for me, it wasn't just about the academics, like I said before. It was also about activism. So when I was a student, here's me right there in the Sarape, the good-looking one. I was like, hey, who's that guy? I was a mechista at UCLA. So we're talking, I started UCLA in 1985. I was 7 years old when I enrolled. I was a child genius. So I'm not that old. So when we were protesting back then, we were protesting apartheid in South Africa, U.S. involvement in Central America, and we actually even had a hunger strike because they wanted to cut financial aid from undocumented students way back then. And then I organized, I didn't put it here, but a campaign for gardeners so that they could use their leaf blowers. And then against the power plant in Southgate, they wanted to build a power plant in Southeast LA. This was the 4th page of the LA Times I was profiled. I put it on the first page so I could look more important. So apart from organizing, recently I've been more of an advocate, because organizing I feel for young people like yourselves. So I've been more of an advocate, advocating for immigrants. So before, right here, it's organizing with, for and with them, right? So I don't separate myself. So working together in campaigns. But in this case, it's more like advocacy work and writing op-eds and speeches like this. Giving TED Talks. I had 2 TED Talks, you can look them up. Remember, I get $1 for each hit. So one on immigration and the other one based on my experience growing up in the projects and giving advice to young people. But for me, I believe that an injustice for one is an injustice for all. I'm an atheist. I shouldn't be defending religious groups, but I do because I think it's wrong. I think it's wrong to put a ban on Muslims, for example, to target all Muslims. There's over a billion Muslims. you know, let's say there's 10,000, let's say there's 1,000 terrorists, 1,000 to 1 billion. I mean, let's think about it. But when I think about terrorism, I also think about state terrorism, like when the United States invaded Iraq. So should those people be put in a ban? You know, the Bushes in Texas and Cheney and Condoleezza Rice and all those terrorists that killed hundreds of thousands of people because of Iraq. So I believe we have to build solidarity for anybody that's attacked. You know, we're talking about Latinas, you know, especially right now with women being experiencing sexual assault in Hollywood and elsewhere, African Americans and Muslim Americans. So to conclude here is I believe that we need to resist. You know, what should be done? What is to be done? We need to resist. There's a billionaire right now that argues that they should impeach Trump. So he's arguing that. So usually when a Mexican says resist, it's like arrest that dude. It's like I know one day Trump is gonna like deport me. Luckily a group in Oaxaca is gonna deport me back to the projects. So he's there's two senators that spoke out against Trump. So it's not about, we're not talking about resist, I'm talking about taking action within the system that allows for the protection of the country based on people that are violating the principles of this country, apart from the racism and the slavery, the principles in terms of free speech, not allowing a foreign power to interfere. So we need to resist, we need to call for impeachment, we need to organize, we need to defend people. You don't have to be an immigrant to defend an immigrant. You don't have to be black to defend a black person or black youth being killed. So we have to do this to pretty much save the country from these bad hombres. And there are some mujeres that are not that good as well, but muchas gracias.
Questions from the audience, comments?
Come on, people, don't be shy.
Yes.
You know, you said that during the second global war, about 4.5 million Mexicans came to this country to replace what for the white man was fighting in Europe. Was there any systematic effort by the U.S. to recruit these Mexicans to go and fight the war in Europe? Because when we invaded Iraq, about 40% of the people who vote in Iraq are non-citizens, and many of them are Mexican.
In the case, that's a good question. So were some of these farm workers recruited to World War II? In that particular case, I don't think that was the case. But today we do have, during the war in Iraq, and then also in Afghanistan, a lot of young people were not enlisting. There's one right now. So a lot of people were not enlisting. And one of the ways that the United States was able to enlist people were to entice immigrants to join. So if you join the Army or the Marines, because they don't want them at West Point, but they want the Army and the Marines, then that will help you with citizenship. So you have a lot of cases, I don't know the exact numbers, where you have probably like in the hundreds of people that are undocumented or immigrants in terms of permanent residents that died in these wars, and later once they died, then they gave them citizenship and all that. It doesn't matter at that point. But you see that they want them for wars, but not like in terms of a pathway to citizenship. Anybody else? Come on, people. What do you think? What I just said? Do you agree? Disagree?
Well, thank you for your comments. I think this is a perfect example of preaching to the choir, right?
Right.
And because we're here as a united voice, whether we are members of the class or faculty who really care. But you yourself mentioned that the Latinos and Chicanos who are in government today are not really speaking.
Right.
And many of them who are the creme of politics are Republicans. Right? And so things are fiercely bad, and they're not going to get better. And so when you say resist, and I agree with you that this generation is responsible much more than my generation from the sixties, right? Because everything that we try to, fight for is right now on the precipice. And so, in your estimation, other than having a bumper sticker that says resist, what kind of advice can you give our students in terms of them going forward? Because our future truly depends on them.
Well, that's an excellent question. I believe that, I mean, organizing the way I organized when I was 19, 20, 18, I mean, that's for young people. You know, this idea, I mean, there's a lot of people out there that think, just vote. It doesn't matter. Like, there was a stupid campaign out there, just vote. That's stupid. What do you mean, just vote? I mean, people just voted for Trump. I mean, what does that do? Right? Voting is one way of participating, but if you vote and the young people are disorganized, then they're gonna do whatever they want once they're in office. Right? They're gonna have their mistresses, they're gonna have, they get, money from the lobbyists, and they're gonna vote based on their self-interest. How is that gonna affect their reelection? And even when they're in state seats, it's the case. Now, I went to school with Fabian Nunez. He was the Speaker of the House, for example. And he was a community organizer, but when he became an elected official and then a lobbyist, now he's in a different class. So in that case, his interests are different now than my interests or the interests of young people, because the interests of young people are today different in regards to young people. Your generation wants free education. Your generation wants to buy a parking permit but find parking, right? So I think the best way is to organize around these issues, and if people are gonna rally around electing somebody, don't put all your eggs in that basket. People have to be organized. They have to come together. And that's the only way you can hold somebody accountable. If somebody is organized, and if somebody's elected, and you can't impeach that person because they're disorganized, and it's no good, I think it's a wasted vote. But if you're organized, and if somebody is like the conservative, like the right is organized, like Bannon, for example, they're organized. If somebody doesn't vote on their agenda, they're going to remove them, right? Because they have the money and they have the organization, and poor people don't have that. The only thing that poor people have is the ability to work and to organize. And young people, your generation, you have the energy, you have the ability to organize around issues that are important. But like I said, I think it should be cross-generational. It should be, you should be able to organize, but it doesn't have to be, I'm an immigrant, I'm undocumented, and I'm gonna be for the dreamers. No, you could be a non-dreamer and organize with dreamers. Because that's when those voices are not heard. When it's just like, Black Lives Matter, it's just black people complaining again, or it's just the dreamers, they just want citizenship, they just want handouts. But it's like if you create coalitions among different ethnic groups, with one common goal is to push an agenda that is everybody should be treated equally and fairly, and organize around issues like that, I think that's the way to go. Right. But there has to be a balance. Not to contradict myself, but I think when you're at the university, this is a great university, you have to balance your education, your activism, and then family. So if you have a needy boyfriend, dump him, especially during finals. And then after finals, you can ask them back. Because sometimes when you're young and you're organizing, and then it might affect organizing too much, it might affect your grades. If you want to go to law school, it's going to affect you. So I think in regards to students, there's a balance of organizing, using your platform as students for like what they did in the 60s with the free speech movement at Berkeley, for example. I mean, young people are the ones during the 60s that stopped the war in Vietnam. It wasn't a politician, it wasn't people on the streets, it was the university students. So universities still have a lot more power than they think they have, but if they have to guard, that power has to be organized. People have to come together and form coalitions under these agendas that I just mentioned. Any questions from the students or comments?
Regarding impeaching President Trump, even if that is possible, given the amount of evidence that's starting to accrue thanks to Mueller's indictments, what happens when Pence takes over?
I think it's gonna be worse. That's the problem. That's the problem with Pence. Pence is worse than Trump. You know, I mean, I think I prefer a Trump because at least you know who you're dealing with. Right? At least you know, like, that guy's a racist. With Pence, he tries to come out very, like, assuring, very reasonable, and, you know, the way he speaks, and very, very conservative. There's a lot of misinformation out there, especially if you listen to the news. Oh, General Kelly, he's gonna bring order to the White House. He's protecting the government. He's protecting us against Trump, you know, engaging in World War III. But Kelly's just as bad. I mean, that guy's a racist just like Trump. Nobody's forced to work in the White House. They believe what Trump believes. They just say it differently because that's just the way they in this case, he doesn't, right? Like, he doesn't know anything. General Kelly doesn't know anything. You know, he's talking about the Civil War being a lack of compromise. What are you talking about? I mean, that is the dumbest thing I've heard in my life. If they had compromised, that means there would still be slavery today. I mean, from a white male's perspective, yeah, it does seem like a good argument, because you benefit, you'll have slaves. But that is a ridiculous idea that he put forth. And Pence is no different. I think it's not going to happen. Well, it happened with Nixon because the Republicans were in control. But when it's not sustainable and the Republicans are looking out for the self-interest, they'll eat their own. You know, they'll go ahead and impeach Trump because it's the cascade, and it's going to cause them votes in the mid-elections, and then it's going to cost them the presidency in, you know, in 2020 or whatever it comes up. But that's a big problem. I think it's a big problem. In a way, I think Trump is better to have because Pence is going to be worse. Because the agenda that he's going to push is the same, but it's going to be more palatable. People are going to accept it more. Right? So that's the problem. Like, the whole team needs to.
So we just have to endure for 3 more years.
Well, I think we need to resist and fight. For example, this is what I mean about fighting. If you're a university student, like, the best people that I've seen, apart from myself, defending our rights are lawyers. Lawyers are kicking butt. Like the ACLU, and sometimes they're idiots because they like support the KKK to have free speech. But other than that, you know, I don't know where these people come from. But being a young person, being at a great university like Cal State LA, if you say, look, I want to make a difference in this world, I'm going to be a lawyer, and I'm going to work to defend our civil rights. And they're the ones that are preventing the Muslim ban to be taken into effect. They're the ones that are pushing against, through the courts, all these bad decisions, the legislative acts. So really what should happen is I think that the Democrats should treat Trump like the Republicans treated Obama. They shouldn't cooperate at all with them. It should be a failed agenda, put up with it for as many years, and then I think Joe Biden's going to be elected, actually. Because it takes a white guy that grew up like working class to beat another white guy, and that's really what's going to happen. You know, because you have to have those. You have to be able to beat somebody like that, like under those terms, right? Because or else he's just going to ridicule somebody who's going to get reelected. A lot of idiots out there using academic terms. Any other questions?
When you spoke, you talked about indigenous people being classified as inferior and that permeating through policymaking. Can you talk about some of the current policies that have been a reflection of this concept?
Well, I think in general, what's part of the indigenous part is you know, has to do with the way Mexicans are treated, Latinos are treated, and not necessarily like as mestizos, as half Indian, half Spanish, which is not the case. I mean, it wasn't like half of Spanish came, and it was only a certain percentage, but it's just the way brown people or racialized people that happen to be indigenous, have indigenous blood, the way they're framed as a threat to the society, right? And just the idea behind it. I mean, if you think about it, like Puerto Ricans, for example, like Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens. So there's 57 Latinos in the United States. I mean, if you take away cable, we'll be like 100 million in 2 years. There's 3 million Puerto Ricans, So literally, there's 60 million Latinos right now. And like I said, the Puerto Ricans are 3 million, but they're US citizens. Now the Hurricane Maria that took place in Puerto Rico, and we see what happened in, I think, Hurricane Harvey in Texas. The gods are with them, that's why they won the championship. But here's the championship. How did Trump respond to both? One was aid, one was we're with you. Not that they're all white there, there's a lot of Latinos, a lot of Guatemaltecos in Houston, for example. There's a lot of Latinos in Texas. But the way he responded to Texas and Florida is totally different the way he responded to Puerto Rico. And part of it is like, on the second day, it's like what the Puerto Ricans, the Puerto Ricans have to start working for themselves. We're not going to be there for them forever. We're going to cut them off. So already it's like blaming them, like blaming the victim, victimizing the victim. They're already poor, they're already in debt anyway. I mean, think about it. Even if the whole electrical system was like they had like the best electrical system in place, the hurricane would have demolished that too. It would have just been like, now it would have been, instead of $80 billion, it would have been $100 billion in terms of relief efforts that are needed. But you see the way the White House, as a representative of white privilege, how they treat different groups differently, like blaming them for their own poverties and blaming them for natural disasters that have nothing to do with being Puerto Rican. It has to do with global warming. It has to do with other issues, right? But I think that's how it's manifested. And sometimes it's not. You're not going to have that many people like Huntington that speak in those very clear terms. It's going to be more coded, a little bit more polished. Regarding Trump, it's not polished, but everybody else. I think we have like 2 more questions, and then I think they're going to give us free pizza. Because they say, if you come over here, I'll give you some free pizza. I'm there.
Thank you for your lecture. With the way the state of the nation is, and since question and answers have been pertaining to resistance, do you think that, we'll just say, people of color will start reacting in another way, in an actionary way? Since similar to the Chicano movement, when I was at UCLA, Brown Berets, 1970, 71, 72, President Mecha, and when there were only 1%, 1 point some odd percent Latinos in the UC system. Oh, by the way, I was at Manuel Sueta's house on his son's birthday in Santa Barbara, your cousin's March. And Quinones, I lectured in his class last semester. I came in and popped in and said hi to my dad. I call him my father.
Yeah.
But because I like to ponder this note in my mind. Just imagine if we were the hate group. There would be anarchy. I've always learned that hate begets hate. And I've always done all the right things as a Mexican and American and stayed patriotic despite it all. So what other measure can we take? Because I just spoke at La Raza Unida conference at Cal State LA 2 months ago, or 3 months ago. And I see the division. And we need all it's not to look at the millennial Latinos, the Latinas as complacent, or the lawyers or the scholars that are sitting in their office writing books about my history, our history. It's going to take collective action somehow, because we're in a situation where, things just might just go wrong. I mean, and I really, really care. I just thought I'd voice that.
Well, that's a good statement. I think what's going to happen is that people are going to act out. And it's like when I was a kid in the projects, every time we go to a store, they'll accuse us of stealing. Like every time. And then after a while, I just, if they're accusing us of stealing, I might as well steal. And then I started to steal. And one of my dreams was to become like a professional thief. I wanted to go into paintings and like the Rembrandts and all. So if you're being told something over and over, you're a threat, or you're this, you're that, people are just gonna take action on that because it's like, I'm being treated like that anyway, so I might as well reap the benefits. Right? So if they're gonna think I'm a thief, then I might as well do it. Right? Or if you're being continuously viewed as like you're being unfaithful, if you're gonna be like that, you might as well do it, because you're being treated like that anyway. So people are gonna respond in that way. You know, when I was organizing in Southgate against the power plant in 1991, they wanted to build a power plant in the middle of the city that was 96% Latino, working class. And some of the residents there, because I wasn't from Southgate, I was from the west side. I was like a west sider, not west side. It's like it was like Biggie Small, like Tupac and Biggie Small, you know, like west side, east coast, west coast. And when I got there, they were like, well, you're not from here. What are you doing here? You know, and at first I was like, was it talking to me? It was this older lady. And then I said, I go, look, let me tell you something, lady. I go, what do you want the young people to do? Do you prefer that they're organizing, that they're getting involved in something productive, or do you want them to be carjacking you? Because I have a cousin that's ready to carjack you right now, just let me know. You know, so like, it's in our best interest that we have productive ways of people to express themselves and encourage that in all facets, right? Whether you believe in voting, or whether it's organizing, or writing op-eds, or going into law, versus taking it to the streets and taking action that is violent and counterproductive, and to a certain degree, you know, detrimental to the cause itself, right? But that's all they need. But I would say this, violence is against people, it's not against buildings. So when somebody does that's vandalism, that's not violence. You know, like if somebody does some type of graffiti or smashing buildings, that's not violence, that's vandalism against buildings, private property. But in this country, private property is like a religion, so it's considered violence. Well, let me just end with this. Because my stomach is saying, where's the pizza? Where's the pizza? I'll just end with this. I really appreciate everybody coming here today, and the organizers, the faculty members, the students, everybody that comes together. You know, when I see all of you, you know, it really makes me feel, you know, optimistic, like I said, about the future, especially after you heard my speech, because now you're better off. And you know, you just do what you can based on your own ethics and your own ability to be good and to do good. So with that, muchas gracias. You know, thank you very much.
Gracias to Dr. Huerta for visiting us here at Sac State and sharing with us his critical insights, his experiences. Again, gracias. Moving on to the 1:30, there's another panel, Decolonizing Comprehensive Immigration Reform, from 1:30 to 2:45. Hope you can stay. So again,